If you agree that true strength often hides in plain sight, like and subscribe, because stories like this one deserve to be remembered. She wasn't dressed in fatigues, nor carrying rank on her shoulders. Just an apron dusted with pollen, sleeves rolled up, arranging stems of tulips and lilies in a weathered stall that leaned against the edge of the marketplace. Most people walked by without a glance, assuming Rune Mist was no more than a vendor in her late 20s trying to make ends meet. A florist, ordinary, delicate. But there was nothing delicate about the way she placed the vases, measured, balanced, precise, as though each glass cylinder stood at attention under her command. The other stall owners laughed quietly about her habit of writing notes in the margins of her ledger, calling it her flower diary. They didn't see that the notations weren't about petals and prices, but times, shadows, license plates. They didn't see her eyes, sharp even in their softness, tracking details no one else cared about. The same man circling the square twice in a week, the unmarked van idling longer than deliveries should, the way a street lamp flickered on the same corner every night at exactly 9:30. Rune had learned, years earlier, to notice patterns because lives depended on them. She had carried maps not for landscapes, but for survival, memorized rooftops, calculated footfalls in alleyways where silence was more important than breath. And though the world knew her now as the woman who tied ribbons around daisies, the habits never left. She lived in quiet watchfulness, her hands soft with petals, her mind still hardwired for threat. That morning, as she straightened a bouquet for an impatient officer, one who smirked and told her, "Bet you've never held anything heavier than these roses," Rune didn't answer. She smiled politely, but her eyes flicked over his shoulder to the corner of the square where a figure lingered just a little too long. The officer laughed at his own joke, tossing a coin on the counter as if respect were something bought cheaply. Rune slipped it into the jar, then quietly sketched a single mark in her ledger. 10:42 a.m., same coat, same posture, third day in a row. To anyone else, it looked like numbers beside flower stock. To her, it was a warning forming a shape she knew too well. The stall next door, run by a woman who sold scarves, leaned over and whispered, "You're too serious for someone your age. Loosen up, Rune. Life's not that heavy." Rune gave a small shrug, rearranging the sunflowers so they faced east with the rising light. She didn't bother explaining that heaviness wasn't a choice for people who had carried classified orders before they were 22, who had been asked to read landscapes of danger and walk back alive so others could follow. To them, she was the young florist who kept to herself, who stayed until late evening polishing glass, too meticulous for no reason at all. To her, the market square was a grid, every corner a checkpoint, every passerby a moving piece on a board. She still played, even when she told herself the game was over. The rain started just after noon, droplets clinking against tin roofs, the smell of wet earth mixing with lavender and roses. Rune pulled the awning lower, tying it off with a practiced knot. Across the street, the man in the coat retreated, but not before glancing at her stall with a flicker of recognition. She felt it, like an old current rising through the years, then forced her hands steady, wrapping carnations for a child who pressed coins into her palm. "For my mom," the child whispered. Rune smiled, handing over the flowers gently, but her other hand slid beneath the counter to the small leather notebook she kept tucked away. Another mark, another shadow to watch. And though no one around her knew, the stage was already being set. Because Rune Mist wasn't simply a florist in a marketplace, she was a sentry in disguise. And sooner than anyone expected, someone was going to call her name, not for lilies or roses, but with orders she thought she had left behind forever. The rain had not stopped when Rune Mist closed her stall early that evening, her apron damp at the edges, fingers chilled from handling glass vases slick with condensation. The marketplace usually pulsed with chatter, vendors hawking goods, children weaving through the lanes, and officers on their rounds trading careless jokes. But tonight it felt subdued, as though even the cobblestones sensed something unsettled beneath the surface. Rune's eyes scanned the square with the same quiet intensity she had carried since her years in the field, training that had taught her to look past faces and see rhythms, habits, and breaks in patterns. And lately, the pattern was off. The same man with the gray coat had circled the square for days, always keeping to the shadows, always departing just before the lamps clicked on. The delivery truck by the corner cafe had idled longer than any schedule allowed, its driver pretending to nap behind the wheel, though Rune had caught his reflection in the mirror, wide awake, eyes darting. She had warned one of the market guards, casual words, careful enough not to sound paranoid. But he had laughed, patting his belt. "Leave the security work to us, Rune. You stick to tulips." She hadn't argued. She rarely did. But her notebook bore the truth. Dates, times, angles. That night, she sat in her small apartment above the stall, steam from a kettle fogging the single-pane window. She pulled the ledger closer, flipping through pages where flowers and figures mingled with quiet surveillance. 9:13, lamp flickers. 10:42, gray coat. 11:05, truck moves, no delivery. She let her pen hover, hesitated, then drew a single line beneath them, the way she had once marked potential breach points on overseas patrol maps. She had left that life behind at 24, after one mission too many, when her name was quietly erased from rosters and she reappeared as an ordinary civilian. But habits didn't fade, not when they had been stitched into muscle memory. Rune Mist had promised herself she would never go back, never answer to call signs or code phrases again. And yet the weight of her observations pressed like a hand on her shoulder. She couldn't ignore it, not when her gut told her something was building. The following morning dawned sharp and cold. The rain cleared but the sky heavy with gray. Rune reopened her stall, arranging roses and daffodils in symmetrical rows, the motions automatic, calming. Customers trickled by, a bride-to-be choosing centerpieces, an old man buying a single lily for his late wife's grave. Rune smiled, listened, rapt, but her mind was elsewhere, tracking movements at the edges of the square. The gray coat again, this time closer, pausing by the fountain to pretend at tossing a coin. Rune's eyes narrowed slightly, but her hands never faltered in tying the ribbon around the lily stem. She slid another notation into her ledger when no one was looking. Behind her, two officers laughed, one saying loudly, "If flower arranging were a metal sport, she'd win gold. Too bad real life needs steel, not daisies." The other chuckled. Rune ignored them. She had ignored worse. Respect wasn't something she expected anymore. But just after noon, as the clouds broke and lights spilled across the cobblestones, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She frowned. The number was unknown, unlisted. Carefully, she stepped back from the counter and answered. The voice that came through was low, commanding, clipped with urgency. Rune missed. The sound froze her. It wasn't a question. It was recognition. Emergency orders. Detective Callan. Code Indigo. Rune's breath caught, a reflex she masked quickly. Code Indigo, words she had heard only once before, whispered during a mission extraction when silence had meant survival. No one outside her unit should have known it. "You have the wrong," she began, but the voice cut her off. "No mistake. We need eyes in the square. Now." Rune hung up without reply, staring at the phone as if it had burned her hand. Her pulse hammered, not with fear, but with memory. The sharp smell of dust and diesel, the hiss of radios, the silence of a city on the brink. She forced herself back to the stall, arranging sunflowers for a waiting customer, her movements calm, deliberate. But her mind reeled. Who was Callan? How did he know her? And why now, after 4 years of deliberate anonymity? As she handed over the flowers, her gaze swept the square again. The gray coat was gone. The truck had shifted half a block closer, and something in the air felt too still, as though the city itself was holding its breath. By late afternoon, Rune closed the stall early again. She carried her ledger under her arm, raincoat draped across her shoulders, and walked the long way home, circling the square once, twice, mapping the blind spots without even meaning to. At the third pass, she noticed it, a gap in the patrol schedule. The guards usually crossed paths every 15 minutes. Today, one quadrant lay empty for 23. Too long. Rune slowed her steps, pausing by the bakery window to glance at the reflection. The truck was still there. Lights off. She drew her coat tighter, forcing herself to keep walking, though her instincts screamed. She had learned years ago not to chase every shadow. Sometimes the mind, after too much war, invented threats. But this wasn't invention. This was pattern. That evening, she didn't sleep. She sat by the window with a candle lit low, her ledger open on her lap. Pages filled with notations, some in neat script, others in hurried scratches. She traced them like coordinates, her lips pressed thin. When the clock struck midnight, she closed the book and whispered to herself words she hadn't said aloud in years. Not my fight anymore. But her voice trembled with doubt. The next morning, the marketplace was louder than usual. A band setting up for a civic celebration, stalls decorated with flags and banners. Rune forced herself into routine, trimming stems, filling vases, arranging chrysanthemums in careful spirals. Children ran through the square laughing. Vendors called out discounts. And for a moment it looked like nothing more than another day. But Rune's eyes never rested. She saw the gray coat again, now joined by another figure, a tall man in a cap, standing too still near the bandstand. And the truck? Parked directly behind the crowd, its driver missing. Rune felt her stomach drop. Then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed again. The same number, the same voice. Rune missed. Code Indigo. Stand by. This time, she didn't hang up. Who are you? She whispered, ducking behind a rack of lilies. How do you know me? The voice answered with steel. Because your old reports are still classified above my clearance. And right now, the square is live. Eyes up. Rune exhaled, gripping the phone until her knuckles whitened. She glanced at the crowd, at the children near the fountain, at the mayor shaking hands by the bandstand. Too many lives, too close to a truck that didn't belong. She whispered into the phone. 2 men, southeast quadrant. Vehicle staged north alley, engine still warm. There was a pause on the line, then a muttered order she barely caught. Confirmed. Lot perimeter. Keep her eyes on target. For the first time in 4 years, Rune felt her past collide with her present. She wasn't a florist in that moment. She was the field analyst again, the one who had been trusted with entire squad survival. And yet she stood surrounded by vases and ribbons, pretending to be invisible. The irony cut deep. But she didn't hesitate. She began directing customers casually, moving them away from the fountain, urging them toward exits under the guise of offering free carnations. She kept her tone light, her smile easy, but every word was calculated. Take these to your mom. She'll love them. Why don't you walk with your friends down that way? Slowly, subtly, she thinned the crowd around the truck. From the corner of her eye, Rune saw movement. Officers slipping into position, their radios quiet but their steps purposeful. She knew then that Detective Callan was real, that Code Indigo wasn't a ghost. The operation was live, and she was once again inside it, whether she had chosen it or not. By the time dusk fell, the square was emptying, the band dismantling equipment, laughter fading down side streets. Rune stood behind her stall, hands steady though her heart pounded. She watched as the 2 men in gray were intercepted near the alley, unmarked officers surrounding them with practiced efficiency. The truck was seized, its driver dragged out pale and furious. And the entire time, Rune never moved, never broke her cover. She simply wiped down her vases, closed her ledger, and lowered the awning as though nothing had happened. But inside, she knew everything had changed. Because someone out there had called her name with a code she couldn't ignore. And though the marketplace looked ordinary again, Rune misunderstood. She had been seen. Not as a florist, not as a vendor, but as what she truly was, and what she might be forced to become again. The square looked normal again the next morning, the stalls opening, the bandstand cleared, laughter trickling back like water after a storm. But Rune knew normal had been shattered. She had stood among vases and daisies while a covert operation unfurled under the crowd's nose, while 2 men were dragged away in handcuffs and a truck filled with devices no civilian was meant to see was hauled into darkness. She had heard the officers whispering as they passed, one muttering. She was the one who flagged it. Another replying, "No way, just a florist." Rune had pretended not to hear, though her hand lingered longer than usual over the petals of a lily, as if drawing strength from its stillness. She wanted desperately to sink back into anonymity, to erase her name from whatever list Detective Callan had read aloud into his radio, but the moment had already branded her. And the proof came that afternoon, when the same unlisted number lit her phone again. She thought of ignoring it, thought of tossing the device into the river where no one could ever trace her, but instead she answered, her voice low. "Rune." The response was immediate. "Report to North Precinct, Room 7. Now." She nearly laughed, soft, humorless. "I sell flowers. I don't take orders." But the voice came again, not unkind, but unyielding. You took orders once, and people live because of it. We need you. This city needs you. Rune hung up without another word. But the weight of the call followed her through the rest of the day. As twilight stretched across the marketplace, Rune closed her stall earlier than ever, slipping the ledger into her bag, folding the awning down, her motions brisk, decisive. She told herself she was just tired, that she needed rest. But her feet carried her in the opposite direction of home, past the cobblestones, past the cafes, down the long road that led to the squat gray building of the precinct. She found room 7 without asking, instinct pulling her to the door where the light under the frame burned late. Inside sat Detective Callan, tall, mid-40s, his suit wrinkled but his gaze sharp. He didn't rise when she entered. He only gestured to the chair across from him. "Rune missed," he said, her name heavy as if it carried more than just letters. She stayed standing. "How do you know me?" she asked. "How do you know that code?" Callan leaned back, studying her as though testing how far silence would stretch. Then he slid a file across the table. Her name, stamped in black. Photographs from years ago, grainy shots of her in desert fatigues, headset pressed to her ear, eyes narrowed at maps strewn with pins. "I was given a partial clearance when the alert came in," he explained. "Your record is still classified above me. But I know enough. You were the one they called the cartographer." Rune's jaw tightened. She hadn't heard that name in years. "That's not me anymore." Callan nodded slowly, then explained this. He flipped to another page, last night's operation log. At the bottom, a line in pen, not typed. Floral vendor's notes matched with breach timeline. Civilian evacuation attributed to Rune missed. She stared at it, then at him. "I didn't do it for you." He shook his head. "You did it for them." Silence stretched, thick. Rune lowered her gaze, tracing the grain of the wooden table with her eyes. Finally, Callan spoke again, softer this time. "You think you left it all behind. But some skills don't retire. And some enemies don't care if you've traded your maps for marigolds. Last night wasn't random. It was probing. They'll try again. And when they do, I want you here, not behind a flower stall, but where you belong." Rune almost laughed. "Where I belong. Do you know what belonging cost me?" She thought of nights staring at red-dotted maps, of friends who hadn't come back, of the silence after classified missions where no one outside the unit even knew to mourn. She thought of leaving at 24 because the ghost had grown too heavy. She thought of promising herself to never again let her life be reduced to codes and shadows. "I'm not your soldier," she said finally. Callan's eyes flickered, but he didn't argue. "Then at least keep doing what you did yesterday. Watch. Record. Warn. You saved lives before anyone in uniform even noticed. Whether you like it or not, Rune, you're still on duty." She left without answering. The cool night air hit her lungs like a wave, but it didn't wash away the weight of his words. She walked home, past the silent stalls, past the fountain where children had laughed only hours earlier. She climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, dropped her ledger onto the table, and sat staring at it under the flicker of a single lamp. The pages looked different now. Not scribbles, not harmless notations, but evidence of something larger. A map unfolding. Her fingers hovered above the cover. Then she closed it sharply, forcing herself to her feet. She boiled water for tea, tried to breathe through the rising panic. But as the kettle hissed, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Callan. It was a text from an unknown number. "We see you, cartographer." Rune's breath stilled. The kettle screamed. She shut it off, staring at the screen, the message searing into her mind. Whoever had been circling the square knew exactly who she was. And worse, they weren't afraid to let her know it. She sat down heavily, phone clutched in her palm, eyes flicking toward the shadow box she had kept tucked under her bed for years, unopened. Inside were the fragments of a life she had locked away, medals she hadn't claimed, a folded patch from her unit, a letter she had never read. For the first time in 4 years, she slid it out and set it on the table, staring at it as though it might answer the question screaming inside her. Could she remain a florist, or had her silence been broken forever? The next morning came gray and biting, wind snapping at the awning as Rune opened her stall. She arranged flowers with steady hands, but her eyes scanned constantly, every passerby a potential threat. She saw the usual customers, Mrs. Halloway buying violets, the baker's boy snatching a carnation for his sweetheart. But when the officer who once joked about her strength approached again, Rune noticed something off. His eyes darted too much. His uniform fit poorly, wrong at the seams. When he leaned in to mutter, "Pretty things for sale, cartographer?" Rune froze. The world narrowed. It wasn't a customer. It wasn't an officer. It was a message. Before she could respond, the man melted back into the crowd, vanishing between stalls. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm, wrapping daisies for a waiting girl. Only when the girl skipped away did Rune allow her mask to slip. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number she had sworn never to use again. It rang once. "Detective Callan," came the steady voice. Rune whispered, "They know me." Silence, heavy. Then his reply, "Then it's already begun. Stay where you are. Eyes up." She closed her phone, exhaling shakily. Around her, the market buzzed on, ignorant. She adjusted the vases, tucked her ledger closer, and let her gaze sweep the square one more time. The world still thought she was a florist. But Rune knew the truth. She was back on the map. And this time, the lines being drawn weren't just for others' survival. They were for her own.